tax, I'm not so sure that it's that desirable for the system. We just print money and throw money at the system. Then you get into a very asymmetrical monetary policy, and you go from misallocating capital to misallocating even more capital. This is where I disagree. I think okay, if they made mistakes, so let the crisis clean the system. And it would be better if the market cleaned the system than essentially a relatively corrupt group of people, that we have to say. There is tremendous rot in the system, in the sense that the governments in Western democracies are no longer looking after the interest of the ordinary citizen. But in America, they've looked at the interest of Wall Street and the financial sector at the expense of the ordinary citizen.
Econome Anne Pettifor werkt in Londen voor de New Economics Foundation. Ze is een bekend pleitbezorger van de Green New Deal, die een radicale hervorming van het financieel stelsel koppelt aan grootschalige investeringen in een groene economie.
How would you describe or qualify the response of politicians to this crisis?
I think the politicians have been incredibly weak-kneed in this crisis. They have bowed to the wishes of the bankers. They have saved us, let's give them credit for that, from systemic failure. But they've done that at the cost of subordinating the interests of the people to the interest of the bankers. And the bankers cannot believe their luck, if you like. They have emerged from this crisis stronger, fitter, smaller. They have less competition. They're making bigger profits because they have no competition virtually. And they're doing really very, very well. Whereas the majority, the people, are suffering the consequences of the crisis, and the government's budgets are carrying the burden of the cost of the crisis. In other words, the cost of the crisis has been nationalized and the gains have been privatized. And if I was to be able to come back to earth in some different form, I'd want to come back as a banker, especially a banker within our globalized offshore system of capitalism, where bankers operated in a, if you like, a never-never world beyond the regulatory radar. That is truly a wonderful place to be in terms of the opportunities it offers to make massive capital gains without carrying the losses. Indeed, governments come and bail you out. And that is nirvana for any capitalist.
So the bankers are the winners so far. Who are the biggest losers?
I think the biggest losers are taxpayers. Taxpayers here in Britain, but in Europe, in Holland, in Spain, in Greece. We're seeing circumstances in which banks are doing very well, for example, in Greece and Spain, but in which unemployment is rising dramatically. So the victims, if you like, are the unemployed, are the young people who can't get jobs, are the public sector workers whose work is going to be cut out of budgets. Are the vulnerable, you know. In my country already, mental health hospitals are cutting budgets, and the mentally ill are going to suffer because of this. So the victims are going to be very numerous, and they're going to be the people on the whole that are not responsible for this crisis.
You would agree that the banks robbed the citizens? The banks robbed the citizens.
The governments robbed the citizens. The governments took the governments took the money from the citizens and gave it to the banks. When the banks got in trouble, they all went to Washington and to London and said, save us. And they did. You know, the U.S. government, let's use that example, the U.S. government saved maybe 1 million people. Well, there are 300 million Americans. I'm one of them. You know, we all have to pay taxes to bail out 1 million people on Wall Street or in the financial community. No. The banks, the government took the money from the 300 million of us and gave it to the 1 million banks. Yes, that's theft. But it's the governments who stole the money. Instead of the government saying, fail, listen, you're the ones who made all those mistakes and did all those crazy things. Why should we bail you out? Why should 300 million Americans have to bail out 1 million guys who made some really stupid mistakes? So it wasn't the banks that stole from the people. It's the government that stole from the people to give to the banks. I mean, so the whole system is weakened. That's called socialism. You should recognize that. You should recognize that system.
If you have zero interest rates, basically it's a huge subsidy of the banks, because the banks can borrow from the government at zero interest rates and they can lend it to you at, say, 5-6%. So they're bound to make some money. But there's a huge shift of wealth. If you look at the entire recovery in the US, 2001, it began in November 2001 and ended up in October, November 2008. An entire recovery. All the job gains have been given back, and today the US employs less people than in 1999, and the population has grown by 30 million. So basically it's been a very bad economic recovery for employment, and the recession brought again very high unemployment rates. But the stock market is up and commodity markets are up. The oil price has doubled since last December. And we just have to live with the fact that if you print money, you can make everything go up. But the problem with building up huge wealth inequality is precisely that one day people say, I had enough.
Пикет студентов, педагогов и ученых обещал быть масштабным. В заявке говорилось об участии 2000 студентов. С первых же минут стало ясно, назревает куда более грандиозная протестная сила.
Почему вы говорите о том, что высшее образование будет повешено? Почему? Потому что нам больше нет денег, потому что нам больше нет ничего, нам нету даже лампочек в комнатах, где мы учимся, нету ничего. Что будет потом? Не знаю. Потом я буду ехать. Я точно знаю, если денег не будет.
Is there a way to avoid the next crisis? Or are we already too far down the road?
Probably are too far down the road now, because they've already propped up a lot of companies and bailed out a lot of people. It's hard now to go to, I don't want to name names, to some of the people that have been propped up and say, hey, we're going to take the money back and now you have to go bankrupt. It's pretty not very practical to do that at this stage. So I'm afraid we're probably too far down the road, and therefore things are going to be worse the next time around. You know, the governments around the world and central banks have shot a lot of their bullets. They're not going to have that many bullets left the next time they have to step in to try to save people.
How would you describe these bullets that they still have?
They have very few bullets left. They have printing presses is essentially all they have now, because many governments have borrowed staggering amounts of money. The United States government and the United States Central Bank have, I mean, the numbers are just, they can't even calculate them, partly because they've got so many off-balance sheet, you know, things they've guaranteed and they don't know how big they are. There are huge guarantees out there. So the United States has essentially shot all of its bullets. The UK has shot all of its bullets.
I don't think the opportunity is lost. I think the time is still right. It takes political will and it takes political leadership. And I'm not sure that our political leaders are fully aware of what needs to be done and have, if you like, the courage to take on the finance sector. In, for example, the way that Roosevelt did. You know, he was fearless. And he faced the same threats and the same aggression, if you like, from the finance sector as politicians do today, but he refused to bend. So I think it depends very much on the political response. They created a framework in which the bankers could run amok in the way that they have done. Now, admittedly, the bankers bribed and lobbied and influenced them to do that, but our politicians could stand up to that. So ultimately, I say that it's a political issue. It's a political problem, because if we had the political courage to say, no, we are going to regulate the finance sector, then I think the bankers would behave as they behaved, for example, between 1945 and 1971, when the system was well regulated, when we had global stability in the financial system, and when we had extraordinary economic growth and stability. So that's known as the golden age. But in that age, the banks were regulated.
Dienu katru dienu atnesko noderīgu, vai vienkārši uzsit uz pleca un saka, turies. Man sēgas, ko man atnesuši atbalstītāji, tas ir guļamais ļoti silts un labs.
Он лишь показывает, в чем они